Imagine that tomorrow you wake up and you can run so fast that you cross an entire country in the time it takes for water to boil for a cup of coffee. No traffic, no distances, no waiting. You could arrive before someone finishes a sentence. You could be in another city before they even blink. It sounds like the ultimate superpower, the perfect fantasy. But real physics has something to say about that dream. And what it says is brutal. Because if you actually had super speed, you wouldn't live out adventures. You wouldn't save cities. You wouldn't become a hero. You would die. And not slowly, not dramatically. You would die at the exact instant you tried to use it. Not for lack of training, not for lack of strength, but because the universe has rules that your body simply cannot negotiate. This is Impossible Horizon, and today we will see why superspeed is not a power. It is a sentence. Superspeed has always been presented as the perfect power, running on water, crossing cities in seconds, dodging bullets, saving the day before anyone even notices the danger. But when we strip away the fantasy and leave only the physics, the story changes completely. This video isn't looking to ruin your imagination, it's looking for something more interesting. To see what happens when we pit a superpower against the real laws of the universe. And what we discover is that there isn't just one single problem. There are several, all piling up at the same time. Today, we are going to dismantle superspeed piece by piece. We are going to explore three great mysteries that turn it into something lethal. The invisible fire of the air, the impossible forces that crush bones and organs, and broken time, where even reality stops behaving as we expect. Because the question isn't just, could you run very fast? The real question is, could your body survive the very first second? And the answer, when we look physics dead in the eye, is much more disturbing than anything any comic book ever told us. Your first enemy wouldn't be a wall, a bullet, or a villain. It would be the air. That same air that currently moves in and out of your lungs without you noticing, and which seems completely harmless. At human speeds, it is. But when you start moving extremely fast, air stops behaving like a soft gas and turns into an invisible barrier capable of destroying you. The reason is that air resistance doesn't increase proportionally to speed. It increases with the square of the speed. This means that if you double your speed, the resistance doesn't double, it quadruples. If you increase it tenfold, the resistance increases 100-fold. And when we talk about speeds close to or exceeding the speed of sound, the air no longer has time to move gently out of the way. It compresses violently in front of you, forming a shockwave. That compression generates extreme temperatures. It's not the typical friction we imagine when rubbing two surfaces together. It is a much more aggressive physical phenomenon, the same one that causes meteors to glow and disintegrate upon entering the Earth's atmosphere. The gas is crushed, its pressure rises, and its temperature skyrockets. In a matter of milliseconds, your skin would begin to heat up to levels capable of producing severe burns. Your clothes could ignite. The air in contact with your eyes and respiratory tract would become scorching. And the most disturbing part is that the danger wouldn't just come from the outside. Your own muscles, working at an impossible pace, would generate a brutal amount of internal heat. The human body is designed to dissipate heat gradually through sweat and blood circulation, not to evacuate thermal energy generated at extreme speeds. It would be like trying to cool a jet engine with a desk fan. Your internal temperature would rise uncontrollably, damaging organs and tissues from within. In other words, before completing a 100-meter dash, your body would already be undergoing a process of partial combustion. Not from an explosion or a futuristic laser, but from something that was always there and that we never considered dangerous: the air we breathe. Superspeed wouldn't turn you into an elegant figure crossing the city. It would literally turn you into a moving human torch. Let's suppose for a moment that you miraculously survived the invisible fire of the air. There is still a much worse problem ahead. It isn't the speed itself, it's the acceleration. The human body can withstand a certain speed. What it cannot withstand is changing that speed in a brutal way. When a plane takes off, pilots feel between 2 and 3 G-forces. Trained astronauts can resist 8 or 9 for a few seconds using special suits. Beyond that, the body starts to shut down. Blood shifts, vision darkens, and loss of consciousness follows. Now, let's imagine what it would imply to go from standing still to supersonic speed in a tenth of a second, just like superheroes do. That would generate over 1,000 G-forces. A 150-pound body under that acceleration wouldn't weigh 150 pounds. It would experience a force equivalent to dozens of tons, pushing every organ against the inside of the body. The heart wouldn't be able to pump blood. The lungs would collapse. The brain would be crushed against the skull like gelatin hitting a wall. And all of that would happen before taking the first step. But the real disaster arrives when you try to change direction. Turning a corner at that speed involves an even greater centripetal acceleration. The forces would easily exceed those experienced by a bullet leaving the barrel of a gun. There is no biological tissue capable of withstanding such a thing. Bones don't just fracture, they simply aren't designed to support those loads. Ligaments tear, organs shift, the body loses its structural integrity. It is not a matter of pain or mental endurance, it is pure mechanics. Superspeed wouldn't give you time to suffer. It would turn you into an object subjected to forces for which human biology has no answer. And here is a detail that is almost never mentioned in fiction. Running fast isn't enough. You also have to turn. Moving in a straight line would already be lethal. Trying to turn a corner would make it straight up impossible. When you change direction at high speed, centripetal acceleration comes into play. It's the force that pushes you outward when a car takes a curve, the same one you feel on a roller coaster. At normal speeds, it's an intense but bearable sensation. At superspeed, it transforms into an instantaneous death sentence. Imagine trying to turn a corner at supersonic speed. The forces wouldn't be in the hundreds of Gs, they would be in the tens of thousands. To put it into perspective, a bullet, as it leaves the barrel of a gun, experiences enormous forces for a fraction of a second. Now imagine subjecting your entire body to something even greater, not for milliseconds, but for the duration of the turn. No bone can withstand that load. No muscle can sustain that tension. No organ stays in place. The problem isn't just that you would get hurt. The problem is that the body would lose its structural integrity. Bones wouldn't fracture like they do in a common accident. They would be subjected to stresses they simply aren't designed for. Ligaments would tear, joints would dislocate, internal organs would shift violently within the torso. The brain would slam against the inside of the skull with devastating force. In fiction, the superhero turns elegantly, as if inertia didn't exist. In reality, inertia is the protagonist, and physics offers no biological exceptions. There is no training that can prepare the human body to withstand thousands of lateral G-forces, no reflex that can compensate for that push. At that point, you wouldn't be running fast anymore. You would be subjected to an extreme physics experiment that no complex organism could survive. Turning a corner wouldn't be a heroic maneuver. It would be the exact moment when superspeed stops being motion and becomes biomechanical disintegration. Let's imagine something even more extreme. Let's imagine that, against all logic, you survive the air, the heat, the acceleration, and the impossible turns. Even then, there remains an effect that isn't physical in the traditional sense, it is temporal. Speed doesn't just affect the body, it affects time. Albert Einstein proved that time is not a universal constant. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you compared to those who remain at rest. At everyday speeds, this effect is imperceptible. But as you approach the speed of light, the difference becomes dramatic. Imagine that you could run at 99% of the speed of light for just one single day from your point of view. For you, a normal day would have passed. But upon your return, you might discover that weeks, months, or even years have passed on Earth. The more extreme the use of your power, the greater the temporal gap. Superspeed would stop being a practical skill and would turn into progressive isolation. You would see your friends age faster than you. You would lose synchrony with the world. Your cultural, technological, and social references would become obsolete in a matter of trips. And if we take the idea to its limit, the effect is even more unsettling. At the exact speed of light, something impossible for an object with mass, time would stop completely. There would be no sense of journey or duration. From your own frame of reference, departure and arrival would be the same instant. There would be no experience. There would be no trip. Only a frozen point. Extreme superspeed wouldn't just put your body at risk, it would put your relationship with reality at risk. You wouldn't necessarily die from fire or G-forces in this hypothetical scenario, but you could end up alone in time, out of alignment with the world you knew, watching as everything changes while you have barely lived a few subjective days. Instead of a power, you would have a temporal exile from which there is no real return. Even if we were to ignore heat, G-forces, and relativity, human biology would still be an insurmountable obstacle. Our body is designed to move at moderate speeds within a stable atmosphere, not to pierce through the air like a projectile. Breathing, something automatic and seemingly trivial, would become a deadly risk. Air would enter the lungs with such pressure that it could damage or rupture the alveoli, the tiny sacs where oxygen exchange occurs. It would be like trying to inflate a balloon with an industrial compressor instead of blowing with your mouth. Attempting to hold your breath wouldn't solve the problem either. The body needs constant oxygen, and furthermore, deceleration would be just as dangerous as acceleration. Braking suddenly after moving at superspeed would involve internal forces as massive as hitting an invisible wall. The circulatory system wouldn't be able to adapt to such abrupt changes in pressure. Blood vessels and tissues would suffer micro tears, internal hemorrhaging, and organ failure in a matter of moments. And here is a particularly cruel irony. Trying to save someone would be as lethal as letting them fall. In fiction, the hero catches a person falling from a building and gently places them on the ground. In real physics, stopping someone in their tracks involves absorbing all their kinetic energy in a fraction of a second. If you don't gradually reduce their speed over several meters, that person's body experiences a deceleration equivalent to hitting the ground. Your arms wouldn't be magic shock absorbers, they would simply be another point of impact. Additionally, motor coordination and balance would also fail. The inner ear, responsible for perceiving orientation and speed changes, would be overwhelmed. Extreme dizziness, loss of spatial reference, and total disorientation would appear before you could even react. The human body does not possess sensors or compensation systems designed for such violent changes in speed. Superspeed wouldn't just put you in danger, it would turn any interaction with others into a potentially fatal act. It wouldn't be a power for rescue, it would be a power that biologically you could not use without destroying what you are trying to protect.
Even if we solved all the physical and biological problems, there would still be one less obvious but equally definitive limit. Your brain isn't fast enough. Nerve signals in the human body travel at approximately 100 meters per second. That might seem fast, but compared to supersonic speeds, it is ridiculously slow. If you were running at the speed of sound, about 340 meters per second, you would cross more than 3 football fields before your brain finished processing the visual information of an obstacle. You wouldn't just react late, you would react long after you had already crashed. Your eyes would send the signal, your optic nerve would carry it, your brain would interpret it, and by the time that happened, you would have already gone through the wall. It would be like driving a car with a 1-second delay in the steering wheel. No matter your skill, the system is simply out of sync with the speed of movement. Now, let's imagine the fictional solution, then make the mind super fast too. That brings up another problem, this time a psychological one. If your perception accelerated to match your speed, the entire world would become desperately slow. A normal conversation could feel like hours. Waiting at a red light would be a subjective eternity. An everyday walk would turn into an experience of infinite patience. The power wouldn't just isolate you physically, it would isolate you mentally as well. Social time would no longer match your internal time. Others would speak as if they were underwater. Gestures would be agonizingly slow. Daily life would transform into an endless succession of pauses. Superspeed, instead of giving you freedom, would place you in a bubble of perception incompatible with the rest of humanity. You couldn't interact normally without feeling like everything is happening in slow motion. It wouldn't be a gift, it would be a form of permanent cognitive loneliness. At that point, you wouldn't be running faster than everyone else. You would be living at a temporal pace different from the world, unable to sync up with the reality surrounding you.
And here we reach the most unsettling point of all. It wouldn't just be you who died. You could destroy everything around you without even meaning to. Kinetic energy, the energy of motion, increases with the square of the speed. This means that doubling your speed doesn't double the energy, it quadruples it. Tripling it increases it 9-fold. At extreme speeds, that figure stops being intuitive and starts being catastrophic. An average human body weighs around 150 pounds. At normal speeds, that mass is harmless. At car speeds, it can cause a serious accident, but at relativistic speeds, it becomes something else entirely. If a human being could move at 10% of the speed of light, their kinetic energy would be comparable to that of a tactical nuclear bomb. Not out of malice, not by intention, simply because of physics. A trip wouldn't just be a fall, it would be a release of energy equivalent to a devastating explosion. An accidental collision could level buildings, generate shockwaves, and cause massive fires. And the most disturbing part is that you wouldn't even need to hit something directly. The displacement of air, the compression, and the shockwave would be destructive on their own. Your body, turned into a relativistic projectile, wouldn't be a hero running through the streets. It would be an energetic event capable of altering an entire city in seconds. This completely changes the narrative of the power. Superspeed wouldn't give you absolute control. It would give you a responsibility impossible to sustain. Every step would be an existential risk, every movement a potential catastrophe. Not because you want to cause harm, but because the energy released at those speeds stops belonging to the human scale and enters the geological and nuclear scale. At that point, the question is no longer could you use your power carefully. The real question is whether the world could survive you moving like that. After going through the invisible fire of the air, the forces that pulverize bones, the distortion of time, the collapse of biology, an energy capable of turning a body into an explosion, the idea becomes clear. Superspeed is not a superpower. It is a total incompatibility between fantasy and physical reality. And paradoxically, that is not bad news. The limits of the universe are not punishments. They are conditions for stability. Thanks to the fact that we cannot move at absurd speeds, there are sustainable biological processes, understandable conversations, relationships that age at the same pace, and an environment that doesn't disintegrate every time someone runs. The relative slowness of our world is what allows the human experience to have continuity, memory, and meaning. If everything were instantaneous, nothing would have weight. There would be no waiting. There would be no process. There would be no history. Physics doesn't stop us from being heroes. It stops us from destroying reality without realizing it. It forces us to interact with the world at a scale where consequences are manageable, where we can learn from mistakes instead of causing irreversible catastrophes in a fraction of a second. The true reflection isn't, "What a shame we can't run like in the comics." The reflection is that life exists precisely because there are limits, because those limits allow time to flow in a shared way, the body to endure, the environment to remain intact, and our actions to avoid disproportionate effects. Slowness is not a weakness of the universe. It is the framework that makes it possible for us to be here, to talk, to observe, and to understand. Instead of tearing through reality, we can inhabit it. And perhaps that is the true power. And perhaps therein lies the most interesting part of all this, not in discovering that we cannot run at superspeed, but in understanding why we cannot. Because the limits of the universe are not there to frustrate us. They are there so that reality can have shape, coherence, and continuity, so that time can be shared, so that the body can survive, so that one single action doesn't accidentally destroy everything that exists around it. Physics doesn't take away our powers, it gives us context. It reminds us that true human greatness doesn't lie in breaking the laws of the cosmos, but in understanding them, in knowing how far we can go, and yet continuing to explore with our minds, with science, and with curiosity. This has been Impossible Horizon. If you enjoy looking at the universe without filters, questioning fantasies, and discovering what lies behind the ideas we take for granted, subscribe and join us on our next journey. Because we may never run faster than sound, but we will always be able to think further than any superhero.